Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Google Hangout for the School of Graduate Studies at McMaster University. I'm sorry, what was that? Oh, all right, so as you can see, this is our first go-round. Maybe it'll get a little easier without any more interruptions, but we're going to go forward, and this morning we have an Ask an HR Expert opportunity for you to ask your questions, graduate students, of our HR expert, Maurice Fernandez. Maurice began his recruitment career in 1997 before internet job boards and Google, and with an information technology search firm in Toronto. In 2005, he joined Ceridian's talent acquisition practice as a recruiter, known for its largest recruitment process outsourcing client, and in 2009, Maurice took over Ceridian's Strategic Recruitment Initiatives Department. In this role, Maurice led a team of recruiters that were responsible for attracting talent for Ceridian's Canadian and its external clients. Today, Maurice is responsible for developing and promoting Ceridian's employment brand across various social media channels, events, and campus recruitment activities across North America. Maurice is passionate about building relationships, HR technologies, Geek Alert, HR marketing, employment branding, and social media strategies. Maurice has also had the privilege of speaking about recruitment issues at numerous conferences and through media outlets such as the Globe and Mail and the Canadian HR Report. Maurice is not anti-zombie, just pro-living, and enjoys speaking about himself in the third person, which I can attest to since I have just read his biography here. But seriously, I have had the privilege of working with Maurice on a number of career events over the years, and he is an amazing HR person. We've got some questions that are coming in, and so I am going to happily hopefully bring Maurice on board. We've had a few technical delays this morning, but oh, there we go. I heard you. So good morning, Maurice. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Catherine. Thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone on this Google Hangout. I really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely fabulous to have you here. So you know that we've been talking about this for a few weeks in preparation, and I thought we would start it off nice and gentle by talking about some of the software that is used in recruiting and hiring practices. So I know that a lot of companies are using applicant tracking software in order to sort through the number of candidates that they're getting. So could you kind of maybe walk us through what happens when somebody submits a resume as part of a job application?
Yeah, and in particular through an applicant tracking system or an ATS. What typically happens there, Catherine, is that actually one of two things can happen. First, you would probably be asked to fill out a questionnaire, which would act as an application form. My recommendation to everybody on this call is that you fill out as much information as possible on that. The technology is so that it's becoming hopefully quicker to fill out that application form, and also mobile, so you could be able to do it off a mobile device or like your tablet or your smartphone. Then once that gets submitted, there is technology in the back end of many applicant tracking systems that will search for keywords in a candidate's resume. Barring that, though, there's an actual human person reading your resume. So the trick, if you will, is to make sure that your resume is formatted with the proper keywords to get a higher relevancy score. It's important to note, because of this, that applicant tracking systems don't really like fancy fonts or graphics. So your formatting should be fairly generic, and stay with a really safe font like Arial or even, I hate saying this, but Times New Roman. And no offense to anyone who's a big Times New Roman fan, but any of the fancy fonts really do mess up the formatting on your resume.
Oh, that's fantastic, Maurice. Thank you so much. Now, I know that we do have some questions that are coming in. We're just sorting through them. But we've had a number of questions coming in. So one of the first questions we have is from Heather. And she's asking, would you have suggestions for applying for jobs requiring only a bachelor's degree and experience if you have a PhD? So perfect question, how do you what do you do in that scenario?
So I think in that scenario, really, it's about the transferable skills that you've developed while getting your PhD. For any job that you're applying for, I think it does boil down to being able to clearly articulate the skills that you've developed in the course of getting your PhD, or even part-time work, or work that you may not think is related, but really looking at that job description and seeing what those skills are, and then being able to communicate that effectively, in your resume, or in your cover letter, or even on your LinkedIn profile, right? And if some of your students have their own personal websites, being able to articulate those skills then too. So that's really the main key that I would like to emphasize, and you'll probably hear me say that a lot because transferable skills are essential, right? It's about making that connection for the employer to you as the candidate.
That's fantastic, Maurice. I know we do talk about transferable skills quite a bit.
Mm.
Um, are there any techniques that the graduate students should be doing or should not be doing in terms of explaining their transferable skills?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we're seeing a lot on, and what really makes a resume stand out, or a candidate stand out in any interview, is really quantifying what they've done with their accomplishments. I think what people sometimes fall into is just using the resume to dump a bunch of their responsibilities and roles and duties, right? But they don't really talk about, well, what did that what did that mean, right? What did you accomplish? So, instead of thinking about, well, my resume is just going to highlight my duties, I think you should really highlight your accomplishments and then quantifying that. So, did your research, what did your research lead to, right? What kind of analytical skills did you develop in the course? Did you work in a team? What was the composition of that team? Those are the kinds of things that employers really want to know, because I think if you look at the skills that employers are looking for, being able to work in a team, often cross-functional, is key. Communication skills are paramount. Even communication skills in like over the phone and email, because you don't have the luxury, especially if you're working for a large corporation, of being in the same location as some of your coworkers, is really important. So, my big emphasis is on, when you're applying for a role, looking at the job description and really seeing, okay, what are the skills that are needed to be successful in this role, and what have I done in the past to showcase that.
That's great. Now, I have to admit, I have a follow-up of my own that I'm
Sure.
just going to add in here.
No
So
problem.
you mentioned communication skills and working in a team and adding all of those things, which are extremely important.
Mhm.
My question to you would be, do you recommend that our students actually have bullet points that say strong communication skills, ability to communicate in person and by phone? Like, how kind of detail oriented should they be in trying to demonstrate that they do possess those skills?
Yeah, and it's a fine balance, right? Because it's funny, the resume. So you'll probably find people that will argue with me that, you don't want to put your resume shouldn't be more than 2 pages. Your resume should be 1 page, depending on how much experience you've had. Um, in my opinion, I don't think it should ever go more than 2 pages. But at the end of the day, you do want to communicate what types of skills you have developed, and then quantifying that. So going back to the teamwork or collaboration, right? If you worked on a publication or a research project, I think it's very important to talk about the composition of that team, right? So how many team members were there? Were they all in Hamilton, or were some abroad, right? Really being able to articulate that. And then, yeah, like to your point, putting a bulletproof, this is a team comprised of 10, with some of the members, out west. And so we then start, as interviewers, formulating our questions. Okay, now I'm really interested in finding out, well, how did you get that communication? How would you get everybody together in the same room, or what was the communication platform that you used to make sure that you guys were all on the same page? So now what you've done there is the interviewer now wants to interview you and start asking you these questions in person. So I think you start building that story in that way.
Great, thank you. That was so helpful. I know it's a question that our students ask a lot, and since We're almost always talking about resumes. I'm very glad to be able to give them, your insight
Mhm.
as far as the communications goes, because
Nice.
that's a thing I see quite often. So now we at least have a framework for that.
One
And
thing I would, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, cut you off there, but one thing I always talk to people about their resume is think of it as a marketing document, and it's probably going to be the most important marketing document in your life because it does talk about you, right? And I know people get a little bit uncomfortable, trying to sell themselves, but if you really just make the resume more about your accomplishments and highlights rather than just a big repository of your duties or roles and responsibilities, um, then you'll see where you can actually add elements of this, quantifying and really hammering home what is important to employers.
absolutely no arguments here. Speaking of interviews, which you so nicely segued for us, we have a question from Kai. And I think this is brilliant. What
Mhm.
questions do you ask during an interview?
As an interviewer or as a candidate?
Well, let's go for both. So, what would your
Okay.
favorite questions be as an interviewer?
As an interviewer, yeah, I'm really partial to asking questions about the job itself, or if we know what the challenges will be with this job, so I will, my questions usually revolve around. So here's some of the challenges we face in this role, you know, and as an applicant for this role, I'd love to hear how you would tackle these challenges, because again, another skill that we look for as employers is problem solving skills and analytic skills, right? So really breaking those down. I'm not a huge fan of those. What is your favorite tree? If you were a tree, what tree would it be? I really don't see the value in those questions. I always encourage, the people that I'm supporting for interviewing, my hiring managers to really understand what the problems are and what some of this, what they're looking for in terms of candidate for solution and problem solving. Um, on the other side of the fence, as someone interviewing for a job, you need to ask questions. Whether it's throughout the interview or after the interview when there's that Q&A. I'm always I like candidates that will ask questions about what it means to be successful in the role. What will success look like a year from now? We're doing our performance review. What do you think success will look like, or what are some of the challenges in this role? It's important though that these questions haven't already been addressed during the course of the interview. But if they haven't, I think it's your opportunity to ask those questions. One of my favorite questions that I really like when candidates ask is for them to ask me what the ideal candidate would look like for this opportunity in this role. I think that's really good. And then asking about questions about the future of the company, the department they're going to be working in. So what's worked, what hasn't worked, and really getting them to really take an interest in what we're doing, right? Whether it's at Ceridian or one of our clients.
That's so fantastic, Maurice. Yeah, we have actually got questions pouring in. We're just trying to kind of compile them. But as a follow-up to the interview question, so we had an interesting email come in from a student who had a job interview, and the student had a PhD. And over the course of the interview, they asked her a question, and I guess the way in which they framed the situation or the behavioral interview question, they had made kind of an error in
Mhm.
the way that they had structured the question. I'm not talking grammar, but in other
Right.
words, it was a flawed question.
Mhm.
She corrected them at the
Mhm.
time of the interview.
Mhm.
Would that be kind of the right call, or is that entering into dangerous territory?
Um, I think I feel it would be the right call. If it's factual, right? I think it shows your knowledge. Now, where it gets into dangerous territory, it's how you corrected that person, right? There is a way to correct people where you make them feel oh wow, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. But there's also the other way of correcting people where you come across as condescending and very patronizing. That could really put people off. So, it all depends on how you corrected the individual. By all means, if someone is saying something that's incorrect, then I think it's right for you for you to correct them. It's just how you go about doing it. That's probably more the key, right?
Absolutely, thank you. That was one that we were wondering about ourselves.
Mhm.
While we're still on the topic of interviews, one of the things that our students are often asking about is how to answer the question about their salary expectations.
Right.
What
Yeah.
would you suggest for strategizing here?
Yeah. So for strategy, I think all the students have to know what their um, what's it going to take for them to comfortably pay their rent or their mortgage if they have one. Is it going to, what's the cost for them to travel to their place of work? What's it going to cost for them to, have reasonable amount of entertainment and also feed themselves, right? So I think the students need to have an understanding of what their budget will be, and that kind of sets the minimum for it. You know, it's okay for students to ask the range in the of the opportunity, and then also to make sure, and if it's possible for the student, if they are flexible. At the end of the day, everybody's got their own standard of living, right? I don't. Sometimes, somebody may be able to take a role at a lower salary than somebody else, right? Again, it all depends on where they're living and what their standard of living is. But I think as a student, you need to prepare yourself, or any job seeker needs to prepare themselves to know what their bare minimum is, and then work from there. As to obviously everyone would like to get paid more, and that's fine. But you need to know what your floor is. Right?
Great, thank you so much. Another question that we've just had come in is how do you get more detailed information about a private company that doesn't have too much information on their website?
Mhm.
How would you get that information, say something that's usually found in an annual report?
Right. So Google is such a wonderful tool, and I don't know how we lived without it before that. Of course, a kid, but yeah. If you're on a company's corporate site and it's very Spartan, then absolutely Google to see what else has been said about the company. Another tool that a lot of job seekers are using right now is LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a fantastic tool. For finding out a lot of business information. And it's also a great tool to find out about the people that work at a company, to see what their backgrounds have been, where they've come from, even their educational background. So I'm a big fan of that. As social media becomes more and more prevalent in our lives, you'd be surprised at what kind of companies are now on Facebook or even Twitter. So these are all avenues that you can do a lot of research as a job seeker to learn about the company. I think Google's always a great starting point, and then taking it to LinkedIn to see what else is being said or what is being written about the company as well.
Awesome, thank you. Um, and thank you to Bohan, if I've said your name correctly, hopefully. That was a great question. Um, Speaking of research, when our students are researching for interviews or doing resumes and cover letters, how much kind of name dropping should they be doing in terms of letting the employer know that they've kind of done their homework? Like how much is enough and how do you determine where that line is?
Um, so for me, it's really about if you know the person. I think that's always important. If somebody referred you to the job from that company, it's always important to use that individual's name, especially if you have some kind of relationship with that individual. I think that's key. If you just happen to just go through the LinkedIn database and just see a bunch of names and you start dropping those names without any kind of context or any kind of knowledge of the person, then I think that's where you kind of run into some difficulties, and you're just name dropping for the sake of dropping names. But absolutely, if you've been referred to the job or you have some kind of personal relationship or business relationship with the individual referring you to the job, I think it's perfectly acceptable to use that person's name in an interview.
Great. So if they were doing some informational interviews or some networking, that would be a great time to be able to go ahead and share that information.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Perfect. We have another question here, one from Pranay, wondering how does someone showcase their skills beyond citing publications?
Mm-hmm.
So I know, yeah, I know that publications can be really important on the academic side. If you're applying to be
Right.
a professor or researcher, publications are huge. And it is quite the accomplishment because there's a lot of work that goes into that. And how do they communicate that to an employer outside of academia?
Right, and I think the important part there is being able to articulate what the amount of work that went into getting your publication finished and completed, right? And what the skills, and again, here we go again with transferable skills. What were the skills that you developed during the course of your publication? I think that's really the key, and that's where the student will have to educate the employer, right? And again, draw it back to, so in the course of completing my publication, these are the skills I developed, and Mr. and Mrs. Employer, this is how this will benefit you. So that's your ultimate goal, right? Is to draw it back to the skills that you developed in the course of that publication. And also, I think the other thing you want to keep in mind is the challenges that came about in getting your publication published, right? I can imagine it would be for some a long labor of love, but talking about tell me about the setbacks with that, right? Because even in the private sector, the world of work, we go through setbacks all the time, and it's really about how you bounce back from those, right? So.
This is great. I think we're getting a real insight into how to translate academic experiences, and then also to keep remembering, as you've so succinctly put it, that it's about the value that can bring to the potential employer, not just the fact that you did it.
Right, exactly. Because there's, people, if they don't know, right, they'll just think, oh, you got published, great. But there is a lot more to that, right? So just tell us about that, like what's involved in that process, right? So.
Absolutely. We have another question that's come in, this time from Wang. And it's one that is very timely, and I'm sure there will be a lot of people interested in the answer to this one. What do you think are the essential things for international students who have really a lot less local experience when they're applying for a job? They may not even have any Canadian experience.
Mm-hmm. And again, right, I think it's about the skills that you're transferring over, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time, but it's the truth, right? It is about the transferable skills that you're bringing over. Whether depending on where you're coming from, what have you developed while you were abroad, right? And then what kind of skills did you develop here while studying at McMaster, right? I think that's also important. I think for what I would probably counsel international students on is make sure that you're a lot more active in the community than you normally would be, right? So join more clubs, or make time to join more clubs, get involved with some of the local either if it's an association or chapters. Universities are great for a ton of different clubs to expand your knowledge and your experiences, so that I think will help you broaden your horizons as well too. So, but again, I'd be remiss to say if I wasn't hammering the point home that it's you can make up for experience with skills, right? And again, the skills that you've developed and how you can articulate that to an employer to solve their problem, right? Because that's what a job opening is for us, right? It's, hey, now we've got this opening. It is a problem for us to have this opening. We need somebody to come in and solve it for us.
Wow, that is so great. I love the way that you kind of went through the skills and experience. And I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit here.
Okay.
So I know there's been a lot of talk about internships lately,
Right.
and whether they should be paid or unpaid, and what qualifies as an internship and what is just simply taking advantage of cheap labor.
Right.
On our website, we have a list of internship opportunities and where people can connect in. As someone who's worked on the employment and recruitment side of things, Do internships really have value for new graduates? And what would you advise someone who is kind of looking into that area?
Yeah, um, I definitely think internships do have value for students. You know, obviously, it is about developing those skills outside of an academic setting, right? I think internships will give students a great opportunity to see if, the private sector is where they want to work. Now, again, I do want to temper that by saying that not all private sector internships are the same, right? They're not all created equally. I think, as a student, it's your role then, or as a job seeker, it's your role to ask the appropriate questions about the internship. What is at the end of this, whether it's 4 months, 6 months, 3 month internship, what will I have learned, right? What would I have accomplished, right? And then you as a student or the job seeker then has to make a decision, this is worth it. And while you're in that internship, you make sure that you hit all your goals, and not only just hit them but exceed them, and you also develop you network internally within that corporation. So I definitely see a great value in internships. I think now is the time to be looking heavily for internships. This is where a lot of the private sector companies are looking for summer interns. So I definitely see the value in internships. But again, as a job seeker or a student, you do need to do your research and make sure that you're asking the questions and making sure that this, is another avenue for you to develop your skills or further enhance your skills.
That is, I'm loving this. I'm loving this so much, Maurice. It's great. I'm going to have this to draw on for time to come. With internships, so if we're looking at people who are completing their masters and PhDs, how early would you suggest they start looking for those experiences? So say someone who is completing a PhD, they could be looking at, say, 3 to 5 years.
Right.
And, we already know it's harder for them to find a lot of positions simply because there's more recruitment for undergraduates.
Right.
Are there any timelines or things that you would suggest they kind of be looking at, or could they even approach organizations to kind of pitch an internship?
Yeah, I love the idea of the student job seeker taking initiative and pitching one to an organization. To me, it shows that you've actually done some, a deep dive into the industry and the company. So much so that you were actually able to highlight, a situation where we could use your help, right? And maybe private sector companies don't realize that, right? So I think that's a great way to differentiate yourself. My feeling is that you should always be on the lookout for your next internship, right? And I know that's difficult with the pressures of, completing your PhD, but I think you should always keep in mind that, the PhD is your end goal, right? But after that, you need to think about life after school, right? And again, this is applicable to anybody that's in post-secondary, right, or any kind of educational institution, life after school, right? So you should always be looking, always let people know what you're interested in, what you're looking to develop. And this could be professors, fellow students, career counselors, yourself, Catherine, your team at McMaster Graduate Studies, right? This is a great resource that a lot of people don't realize and I don't think utilize fully. So for me, it's always about making sure that you're always looking out for that opportunity where you can either, again, develop your skills, enhance your skills, or even learn new skills.
I completely agree with you, and point well taken, Maurice, there. And you're right that the end goal should always be what's happening after graduation, and also I hear a lot from our students, particularly because our graduate students and our postdocs, they're around 30. They have families, they have family obligations, and they're busy. And one of the things I hear very often from them is that they have questions about headhunters. one of my former clients had said that she was told in an interview that if she had been referred to them by a headhunter, then she wouldn't have been granted the interview at all because of the back end fee, the
Right.
finder's fee.
Right.
Could you explain for our listeners a bit about how that works and what exactly a headhunter is?
Yeah. So a headhunter or a recruitment agent is someone that the companies will actually pay to find experienced workers in the labor market. Now, they usually get paid and by companies for experienced workers. So, as a grad student, PhD student, there could be some debate as to whether they do have enough experience to warrant being represented by a headhunter. Again, that's really the company's decision on what they want to do. Most companies, they feel that they can go out and find recent grads or new grad talent on their own, so without having to pay that fee. Um, the one thing I would say, to your students or your soon-to-be grads is that if you do want to use a headhunter, there are a lot of headhunters out there. Um, like anything, I think it's good for you to ask a lot of questions about them, develop a relationship with that individual, a professional relationship. Ask questions about the types of roles that they filled, what industries they support, and if you feel comfortable with them, and develop a really strong relationship with them, they should be able to tell you if they can help you or not, right? And they may not help you in your first role or your first job, but they may be able to help you in your second job down the road. So whether it's useful for a graduate student to use a headhunter, it can be. I think you may get some information from them just on what's happening with the market. And in particular, if they're specializing in a niche field that you'd like to work in, I think that's valuable information as well. But you should never, as a job seeker, pay for the headhunter service. That's the one thing I have a strong opinion on, that you should never ever pay for that. The clients should pay for that, not the seeker.
Thank you. That was my very next follow-up question. Um, Now, differentiating from, say, a recruitment agent who
Mhm.
is working to fill a specific vacancy or type of vacancy,
Right.
what about temporary staffing agencies as a method of gaining some experience? I know one of the areas that our students and postdocs are concerned with is the fact that they may look overqualified or underqualified, depending on how many years they've got in academia, how many degrees, and whether they've worked outside of the university at all. Would doing some temporary employment stints um, help to show that they are employable beyond the lab or the library?
Yeah, I don't see any trouble or problems with that. I think it's good for and I think that's maybe the challenge that the private sector employers will have is, okay, so you've worked in a lab or a library or an academic setting. In the private setting, it's a little bit different. Have you had experience working in that, right? And then having being ready for that kind of experience is key. So I think going through a temporary search firm to get a role where it may just be a short contract, but at least the individual or the student gets a taste of what it is to work in the private sector. But then again, the caveat I always have to say is not all private sector companies are equal, right? There are some that have really great employment practices and others that are still working to get to great employment practices. So as a job seeker, you can't paint every private sector employer with the same brush, and private sector employers can't paint all graduate students with the same brush. So, but I definitely do see the value of working with a temporary search firm and getting a job a temp job in a private sector in the private sector environment.
Thank you. That's actually one of the things that I did after my master's and my PhD was I worked through agencies,
Okay.
and I was constantly hit up with oh, you have a master's, oh, you have a PhD. I would never expect that you do. So there's
Hmm.
all these perceptions of what
Right.
people think someone with a master's or a PhD
Hmm.
is like. Um,
Yeah.
Other than
Uh,
getting kind of a foot in the door in
right.
order to contradict that. Are there any strategies that you would suggest our students are engaging in?
Well, I think right now the world's becoming a lot more social. So I think having your a really well developed social profile on a LinkedIn perhaps will be a really good tool for students and postgrads. You can showcase a lot more on LinkedIn because they've got some neat tools that you can upload. You can upload all your publications on that. If you've got numerous awards, you can put those up for winning, for getting your publication published. I think that's key. And it just further augments what you've done on your resume. I think that's a great tool. You know what? Again, with the increase in with the proliferation of the internet, having your own personal website, I think is a great tool to showcase your talents outside of, a publication or a really static resume. I think that's key. But you know what? I think, Catherine, for any post-grad student trying to break into the private sector, I think they're going to have to prepare themselves with the question of, well, why do you want to do this? This world does not require a PhD. Why did you do your PhD, right? So I think being able to tell your story, I think one of the great things about going through and getting your PhD, and this is something that I don't have, the capability of doing, but I think the students able to quantify their passion and their commitment to things, right? Because I think a lot of employers look for, well, I'm looking for a person that's committed and have a strong work ethic and passion. Well, how do you quantify that, right? That's difficult to quantify, right? So I think, by being able to showcase, well, yeah, I went through the 3 to 5 years to get my PhD. I am committed to things, right? I think it's a wonderful way to showcase that, and I think it's a good stepping stone for you as a job seeker to really be able to hammer home one of those key elements that all employers are looking for out of prospective employees is commitment and passion and work ethic as well. So.
Wow, that was so well put. I love your insight into the career story and telling the story of passion and commitment. That's really awesome. While we have you on the subject of LinkedIn, I'd like to follow up. We have a question. We have a number of workshops that are coming up in the month of March on LinkedIn, and we have a question that's come in. How much is too much on your LinkedIn profile? Should you just put everything there, or should you temper how much you're putting on?
Well, I think what's the use, right? Like, I think, is it useful? Are you showcasing a particular skill set? Are you talking about a particular accomplishment that you're really, really proud of? I don't, things from, the 90s, I'm not sure if you need that in there. Do you know what I mean? I think it's got to be relevant. I think LinkedIn does allow you, but it does have character limitations as well, right? And word limitations to upload information. So I think, you want to be selective about what you put up there. Also, remember, it's a business networking tool. It's okay to show a little personality, but it's not the place for you to put stuff about, like heavy interest in your hobbies, right? I say that, and if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I do talk about 2 of my hobbies, but I think that's just so people know that I'm also human, right? Not just this recruitment automaton, right? But I think there is anything that you put on LinkedIn has to have value to your end goal, which is to, get a position. And I think for most of the callers or listeners on the Google Hangout, it's about getting a position in the private sector. So, and in the private sector, if you're particularly interested in a particular field, like let's say technology, right? Then anything that you're putting up there, how does that make you, a thought leader or have opinions on what's happening in the technology sector, the skills that technology companies are looking for? That's what I would include in your LinkedIn. If you want to break into finance, that's what I would concentrate on. But I think it's all about what's the use of what you're uploading and putting onto your LinkedIn profile.
Well, thanks for that. Okay, we have another question that has come in. um, based on negotiating contracts.
Okay.
And our student would like to know, they've been offered a contract,
Hmm.
and it's their first position after finishing their degree. And they want to make sure that they don't lose the opportunity, but they would like to negotiate a few things
Okay.
aside from the salary. So we're talking about like start date,
Right.
benefit, vacation. Is
Hmm.
that something that's appropriate to do in a contract position, and particularly a first contract?
It doesn't hurt to ask, right? I think the key is on how you're asking and what your end goal is here. Are you prepared to walk away from it if you don't get what you asked for, right? That's I can't, that's the student's decision there, right? But I think it's perfectly okay for anyone that gets a contract to ask, is there an ability to or an opportunity to negotiate, vacation benefits? Now, the one thing that most folks need to keep in mind is that usually in a contract, you don't get benefits and vacation, but what you do get is a higher salary or hourly wage, right, to cover for that, for the lack of, benefits or vacation. So that student needs to understand that and make sure that they understand that if that's why they're getting the rate that they're getting or the salary that they're getting, it's because they're not getting benefits or vacation, right? Because those are costs to the employer. But salaried employees get that, right? But they wouldn't necessarily get as high of a rate or salary. So,
That's a very good point. And now a lot of employers happen to be hiring people based on first contract,
mhm,
and then moving forward from there.
mhm.
What advice would you have for a student who is filling a contract opportunity, um, as they're moving forward?
Mhm. So the first piece of advice I have for the student is to make sure that you are meeting the employer's expectations, and not just meeting them, but exceeding them, right? Because that way you get to be seen as someone, or as we like to say, you're developing a personal brand as someone who's reliable, who's someone that knows, that can be counted on, right? Um, Second thing is, while you're in that organization, try to network your way. Everybody, I think networking gets such a bad connotation, and networking, everybody thinks that networking ends once you get an opportunity, but I think it's really an evolution and a continuation, right? When you're in an organization, right, even as a salaried full-time employee, I think you should always be networking to see, what else is happening within an organization. Who else can I support? Always keeping in mind, though, that you were hired for one thing, so make sure that you're doing that really well, right? Because that way, if a project comes up in another division or in another area, you can throw your hat into the ring, and you'll have people championing for you to say, yeah, you know what, Catherine's on a contract with us. She's done an excellent job for us. Yeah, you should definitely talk to her about that open role in your division. So, those are my two big pieces of advice on that is, do the job that you were brought into and do it really well. And second, always be networking, learning about the organization, learning, meeting individuals, whether it's volunteering on a committee, whether it's throwing your hand up and saying, you know what, I have some bandwidth here. I can definitely help out on a project here if you want as well. So,
Fantastic. And you're going to love this next question because it follows
okay.
up on what you were just saying there. It's a
Okay.
question we have from Kurt. I've heard a lot about using the hidden job market to find a job.
Mhm.
What are the best ways to access that coming from academia without many contacts outside of the university?
So first thing I would suggest to Kurt is develop contacts outside of the university. I know I don't mean to be, facetious about that, but I think, it goes back to networking, right? Take a look at your network, right? Are all the individuals in your network, are they in academia and you're trying to break out? Then, using a tool like LinkedIn, pick an industry that you're interested in, Kurt, and saying, okay, you know what, I want to break into technology. So let's start looking for folks in technology. You know, McMaster has developed some excellent folks in the tech field, right? Try reaching out to alumni in the tech field from McMaster, right? Because right now there you have a common ground, right? Hey, I'm a Mac alum. You're a Mac alum. We should talk about what your experiences were at life after Mac, right? So yeah, so take a stock of what your current network is and how limited it is, and then see how you can branch out a bit more, right? And then once you land an opportunity, again, continue to build up on that networking. And if you're not comfortable with the term networking, relationship building, right? These are skills that you'll need to work on. I work in a multinational team, so I have to work across multiple geographies and also multiple departments. So I'm constantly developing my relationships across, you know, the entire functional areas at Ceridian. So it's not something that you can, once you get your job, you can just kind of kick back and say, that's it, I don't have to develop relationships anymore. But I would definitely take stock of your network currently, Kurt, and then just build out from there and target a particular industry that you're interested in, or just looking at LinkedIn, and there's a great alumni tool on LinkedIn that you can find Mac grads and start talking to them about what their experiences were, and they'll be in different fields, so you can start building out from that way as well. I hope that helps.
That was incredibly helpful, and as a shout out or a bonus for Kurt, because I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. And I'm also a big fan of McMaster alumni, because I think I've used that. Hey, you're an alum. I'm an alum. We should talk. I think I've used that on you.
I think that's how we met once. Yeah, it's fine, and it's good. I think it's a common ground. Like, it's common ground, right? I think that's a lot of people get freaked out about. Well, how do I approach a stranger? Well, you find something in common that you have with them, right? Like, whether it be McMaster, whether it be ultimate frisbee, whether it be rock climbing, whether it be I don't know, rocks, right? If you love, collecting rocks and whatnot. But I think that starts a common conversation. You can take it from there, right? And I think LinkedIn is a great tool. Twitter is probably one of my favorites for that as well, because in Twitter you can follow people without getting their permission unless they're completely private. But you look at Twitter and you can look for thought leaders in an industry that you're trying to break into. So start following them on Twitter, start seeing what they're saying. What kind of publications or articles are they reading? Can you contribute to that? Especially if you've been published already, right? So there's a bunch of synergies here that are at work, but then you can just jump on, right? So.
Absolutely. And yeah, you were one of the driving forces in me being more visible on Twitter.
Yeah.
I just followed your lead, and I was drawn into that world. So I give you the blame on that. But they are very useful tools, and for our students who are worrying about how to actually make use of that, we're going to have a series of workshops in March, so check out the mailers that comes, and you'll be able to get that information. We are in our last few moments, so if you do have a question out there, everyone, please submit that. And I do have one here from Heather. She says there seems to be a bit of a catch-22. We need work experience to get a job, but we need a job to get work experience. Any tips on getting that foot in the door when you're finishing or leaving your graduate studies?
Yeah, and again, Heather and everybody on this call, I do apologize, but I do firmly believe it is about the skills you've developed. Even if you think the job you did was a summer job, right, and you're like, how can this possibly get me to where I am? Believe it or not, I got my first job in recruitment because I was a camp counselor. And my manager at the time said, I hired you because you developed infinite amount of patience working with children, and sometimes in HR you do have to have that patience and empathy, right? So working with kids, you develop to be really empathetic, and sometimes when in HR you deal with people at their worst day, so you need to be really understanding. So you'd be surprised, Heather, I think you need just to take a step back, and I agree with you. It can be daunting with this catch-22 of like, how am I going to get experience without being able to get a job, and vice versa. But I think you just need to take a step back and see, okay, well, what have I learned? Even if it's just in an academic setting, it's not just in an academic setting. You've developed skills, right? Analytical skills, which are very important for today's employers. Aptitude and learning, which is extremely valuable to employers. Communication skills, written, right? Especially if you've gotten published, right? There's a reason you got published. You need to take stock of these things, and then don't look at them as just, in the realm of academics, but think of them, okay, how can this translate to an employer, right? And so sit down and look at some of the job descriptions that are out there. Granted, a lot of them are just a laundry list of must-haves, but I think behind those those must-haves, I should say, there are skills needed to solve those problems, right? So, you've got the know-how or the ability to solve those problems. I think it's for you as a job seeker to kind of connect the dots for employers.
Well, that was certainly a fantastic way to end our hangout, Maurice. Great advice you've given all morning long, and I thank you so much on behalf of McMaster School of Graduate Studies and our students for joining us and sharing your insight and expertise. We will, of course, keep the comment section open on the YouTube video, so that if anyone wishes to continue the conversation or post more questions, you can do so. And we'll also share Maurice's information, so if you wanted to follow him on Twitter, or if you're looking to reach out to him and you're a Mac alum, we can certainly help facilitate maybe a follow-up discussion and put you in place.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Catherine, and the Graduate Studies group at McMaster. I really appreciate you guys giving me the time today. And for everyone on the Google Hangout, I really appreciate your time. I know that we're all really busy, but I do appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to join us today.
Well, thank you so much, Maurice, and hope we will see all of you on our next Hangout. So thanks very much and have a great day.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.